Greetings, my relatives and my people. Welcome to Neheje, Our Voices Indigenous Solutions podcast. I'm your host, Lila June. So happy to be with Nikyle Begay and Kelly Dune, which rhymes, I just realized. These are wonderful, wonderful people who are shepherds and take care of the traditional indigenous sheep, the Dene sheep, as well as they own the Rainbow Fiber Co-op, which helps to bring the wool of these beautiful sheep out into the world and to honor Dene people as shepherds and our tradition of really working with these beautiful sacred animals and their wool and everything. So we are in for a huge treat. I'm not kidding. This podcast is going to go down in history. Even if like not everyone listens to it this month, it will be like an imprint, a fingerprint of Dene beauty. And it's so important. These stories are so precious. So we're truly very lucky that you're generous enough to share. Do you know of other animals that other Native nations or any nations take care of? And why do you think it's important for humans to take care of animals?
One nation that really sticks out are down in Peru, especially the ones that herd alpaca. Those nations there believed that the gods placed the alpacas on one of their sacred mountains for them, and that those people would remain on Earth as long as the alpacas remained on Earth. And it's like, as long as the people treated the alpacas with kindness and respect, the alpacas gave them back the kindness and respect. And that just hit me down into my core because, my grandmas, whether it's on my mom's side, my dad's side, my great grandmas especially, they always used to tell me, like, if you take care of the sheep, they'll take care of you. I guess domesticated livestock in general, is kind of a way for people to become a part of the land. I feel that if I didn't have sheep, I wouldn't know the different types of plants that grew around here. If I saw tumbleweed, I'd be like, oh, that's just tumbleweed. But now I know that, like, if you crush up a tumbleweed and put it in the feed, it's a good source of protein. And not only tumbleweeds, but just other plants like four-winged saltbush. So it's definitely, it helps ground you in a sense, and it also helps you become a better steward and caretaker.
It reminds me of the Winnemem Wintu of Northern California, who I had the joy of spending a lot of time with. They say the same thing about the salmon. As when the salmon leave, we leave. If the salmon are here, we will remain. And sadly, the salmon are almost extinct, and so are the Winnemem Wintu. In a sense, there's like only like 30 active tribal members left. But man, they are a feisty tribe, and I love them so much, and they never give up, just like the salmon. So I really think that humans are meant to be in relationship with animals, like very, very close relationship. And It makes me think of the horse too, and the native nations who are so connected to the horse. And I think it teaches you responsibility too, like having something to care for every day gets you outside of your selfish self, and like thinking about life, it helps us step into our role as stewards of life. But yeah, Kelly, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, that is the thread that I think that runs through all of it is the the act of care and caretaking and being in relationship with the flock or a species or an ecosystem. It does take you outside of yourself. It grounds you in a higher purpose. It makes you aware of the seasons, of the cycles of things. That's a way of keeping people in balance, I feel like, if it's done right. And we see so many examples of when things are out of balance and that's not done right and it's chaotic, or we're treating animals like machines, or just everything's all this extraction mentality. And so, living with the flock or living, I think about the native peoples of the area that I live in with an act like prescribed burning versus grazing. It was just very similar mentality of care and relationship.
For people listening, I just really encourage you to even consider the possibility of being in relationship with animals, so that we can restore our traditions, because almost every native nation and every nation in general has these really deep, beautiful, precious relationships with very distinct species. So, think about, what did your ancestors care for, and how could you step back into relationship with those beings again? Nikyle, why did you choose to carry on this tradition? You could have done anything. You could have moved to New York City. You could have become a video game coding designer. You could have done anything. Why did you choose to dedicate your life to this tradition of our people?
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I did major in computer component engineering. and and I did work for this company called Jabil Circuit in the Bay Area. I was raised around sheep, and the story really starts when I was born. My dad's mom, the sheep have just always been a big, important part of her life. Recently, I had worked up the courage to ask her, like, Grandma, why am I so into sheep? Why am I so into weaving? And I always get so emotional telling the story. She said, when you were a baby, we're all born with our umbilical cords connected to our mothers, right? So when it's cut and it dries off of our bodies, it eventually falls off. And she said that is a very sacred moment in our beliefs. So she said that when my umbilical cord had dried and fallen off, she had taken it to the heart of her sheep corral. And she had prayed, that if there is one of my grandchildren to carry this life way on, I hope it is this one. So she gave it to the sheep, she gave it to the land, and basically praying that I would follow in her footsteps, which I feel that I am not there yet, but definitely still striving to do to this day. So, that's how I've just really become involved in raising sheep and in weaving.
What is it that draws you to keep coming back to the corral? What do you enjoy about it? What makes you feel alive about it?
So, there is nothing like smelling like sheep poop. It just feels like home, honestly.
You see what I mean when I said earlier that sheep people can kind of only relate to other sheep people at a certain point?
When I was a kid, the sheep just always seemed so magical and so peaceful. There was just always something new to do. I mean, of course, it was like seasonal work, but when you're out on horseback going after the sheep, it's like every day was a new adventure. And while you're having fun, the sheep are just like looking at you a little weird while they're eating. you know I'm over there playing with like my little toy cars in the dirt, and meanwhile the sheep are like, okay, we're gonna go this way now. So there was I can't explain it, and I just attribute my um love for the sheep to what my grandma told me.
Thank you for sharing about that. And it's funny when you said rolling their eyes, because sometimes I feel like my sheep do that to me a lot. Like, oh, there she is again, trying to fix the fence, like, I always tell people they're way smarter than me, because I have like a sheep cam, right? And so when I leave, I had to see what they're doing when I'm gone. And they're just like so freaking intelligent, like kind of like picking apart the fence, like picking the lock, trying to get out. And and then when I come back, it's almost like they're like, okay, everyone act natural. She's coming back in. But I like that claymation Shaun the sheep, because
yeah.
it just shows that the shepherd is just this doofus, right? What's going on? And the sheep, meanwhile, are like plotting and scheming all this stuff. And I really feel like that's true. The sheep are like extremely intelligent.
They are very intelligent. They're also very intuitive. At the beginning of Rainbow Fiber, like I said, it began during the pandemic, and I was outside sitting on the red rocks behind my house, and the valley that we live in was just full of smoke because there was just a horrible wildfire raging south of here. And there was a medevac just going over the house like every 15 minutes, flying people out who, weren't doing well with COVID. And I, am a very emotional person. And, I just sat there and I cried, thinking about the people, thinking about the sheep, and who would continue this, even thinking about myself, like what if, things were so uncertain back then, and I'm thinking like, what if I contract COVID and I die? Who's gonna continue this for me? Who's gonna care as much as I do? And I'm not elevating myself and saying that I care the most, because there are people out there who genuinely care about what we're trying to do and trying to preserve, and there I am, just a blubbering mess on the rocks. And my sweetest sheep, her name is Hala, she comes up to me and she just starts sniffing, very intently, and just comes right up to my cheek. And, I can just hear her breath going in and out of my ear. And, I'm like, oh, this is sweet, having a moment, feeling better. And she sneezes. So there's just sheep booger all over the side of my face. And I felt happy. I took that as a blessing, because she didn't want me to feel that way. So these are very important, intelligent, intuitive animals. And we're just trying to do our best to make sure that they continue on with the generations after us.
So the next question is a bit deep, maybe, I don't know, but what is the emotional and or spiritual dimension of being a shepherd to you?
So I was most fortunate to grow up around a lot of the traditional ceremonial teachings and events. One of them being the winter ceremony that we know as Yebiche. And as a kid, I remember there was just on the last night of the ceremony, when they're dancing outside in full regalia, inside the Hogan, they're singing, and basically in those songs telling a story that kind of progresses through the healing of the person that they're singing for. And one of those songs is it pays homage to the bighorn sheep. And my grandpa, he is a medicine man that knows that specific nightway ceremony. And when I was a kid, I'd be like, Grandpa, can you sing the Mat Mat song? And I said, I would call it that because they would say it in the song. Like an excerpt from it is where the rainfall is falling on a bighorn ram, and there's just a trail of water just gleaming from the base of his horns going down his nose and into his mouth. And that was just like a sacred sight to see. And in that song, they also say the words of the animal, which was Mat Mat. So, just hearing that, and, just again, just being so immersed in it, and in sheep and shepherding, that also just struck me as just being so beautiful, like to know that for eons, our people have just had this love and respect for sheep. So now that I am doing it on my own and raising my own flock of sheep, it sends me through a whole lot of emotions. Like I'll be very, very happy, and of course I love and respect my flock, but also, I worry for them like they were my own family. It tests you, but in a good way. And it seems like it's a good type of test too, whether it's physically or mentally or emotionally, because ultimately you learn from it. So when you learn the lessons that they're teaching you, you appreciate them more.
It dropped down to like, I think 9 degrees one time this winter. And I just was so worried about them. And I know they're fine. They're very tough and they had a lot of good wool on, but you have to pray for them and say, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, guys. I wish I had like a little blanket to put on you or something. I wish you would stay still long enough for me to put the blanket on you.
I like that Nicole used the word test, because that's one of the first things that comes up for me is in the emotional spiritual realm, is being so tested by something. Because when you take on a flock, the responsibilities that come with that, it's 365 days a year through whatever weather conditions, economic challenges, personal challenges, things you may have going on in your life other than the sheep. Be loss, there'll be death, there'll be predation, there'll be, all these primordial forces that you have no control over. And there's times where I've just been brought completely to my knees crying alone with the sheep in frustration. And you walk through all that, and you just have to pick yourself back up and keep going. So, the word resilience, it truly is that for the spirit, because if you love the sheep, you're going to pick yourself back up and you're going to keep going. So it's like testing your mettle and facing life, facing death, facing nature, facing all the things that you cannot control, and yet still trying hard every day to control them in some sense. It just really takes you through so much. And then to just bring you back to that love all the time. It's kind of like parenting, I guess, a human child, which I have a 15-year-old. It has taken me to the darkest places, the lightest places. It's like the most challenging thing that you'll ever do in your entire life in some ways is try to parent another human being, especially if maybe you didn't have the tools from your own parenting. And so there's just a lot of parallels to me with shepherding and the things that it's put my spirit through. I'm a little older than you guys. I'm 48. And just when I reflect back on my life, those are the two things that have changed me as a human being the most.
And I thank you both for caring for these beautiful beings, these beautiful relatives. One thing that's I wanted to ask is, what do you think the sheep would want to say on this podcast if they could have a microphone and some of the messages they would want to get out there?
That is a great question. I think mostly they would want to be seen, because a lot of people, especially in this political climate that we're in, to call somebody a sheep is to kind of degrade them. But in all actuality, sheep are very, very smart animals. They know what's up, and they know, they're not just followers that will, follow the leader off the cliff. They're actually survivors. Or if they had a voice, they would definitely continue to talk about the special relationships that they have with their shepherds, because this breed especially has been very resilient throughout times, because they were affected by what our ancestors were affected by. We have the long walk, we have the stock reductions, and we were most recently able to talk about the 1918 flu pandemic that went through. Even then, shepherds and families were dying by the household, and the sheep were still confined because their shepherds were so sick to go get out with them. So even they were dying, but somehow, they were able to survive. Into recent generations of my own grandparents being taken away to be shipped off to boarding school. There are elders who tell the tale of being saved by the sheep, because the sheep would lead them into safe areas that nobody else could get to. So definitely, I feel that those are the things that the sheep would want us to continue to tell. And it goes back to what a lot of the shepherds were raised with, is you take care of them, they're going to take care of you. And that's just in so many ways.
And earlier we were talking about, the story of the churro sheep. A lot of people saying they came from the Spanish, which, they might have Spanish genetics, which is not a bad thing. Hybrid vigor is great. But what part of that story do you think the sheep would like to tell?
I think definitely they would like for us to say that, we've always been in relation with them, because there are a lot of elders who, they say that we've always had sheep in the beginning. There's elders out there who call the sheep, they call them ta debe, which means the true sheep, the first sheep. And it's a sheep that they remember, that their great grandparents remember, whose grandparents would remember. I think they would always just want everyone to know that there has always been a relationship.
I think that the sheep would say, that we're worth protecting. One of the things that's so frustrating about one of the many things that's frustrating about America is everything should not be about money, monetization. So much of agriculture is dominated by those issues and how different breeds of animal are even used, and what's deemed worthy and less worthy is all tied to commodification of things. And the fight for something like Navajo Churro sheep is around saying, not everything needs to be defined by that. Some things are bigger than that. Some things are more important. Some things are worth holding on to and have meaning that goes outside of that. And so I feel like that's what a project like ours is fighting for. It's what the Dene people are fighting to make sure that people understand. And so anything we can do to support the preservation of this breed, is important for that reason.
Yeah, it's interesting when I tell people I have sheep, one of the first things they say is, "Oh, why? For the wool or for the meat?" And I'm like,
the stories.
Yeah, it's like they're not just like these things that give you wool and meat. I mean, they do, but they're people too. That's like if someone said, "Oh, why do you have a wife?" For the body or for the, like, I don't know, whatever. And it's like, well, she's a human being and I like to be in relationship with her. That's how it is with the sheep. These are our relatives. That's like saying, what's the commercial value of your daughter and your son? It's like these are our people. Just because they have four legs doesn't mean they're not people. The spiritual healing that they give, the teachings that they give, I haven't even gotten all the teachings yet. I just barely started the flock, but just teaching us how to be a mother, how to be a father, how to be in relationship with each other, how to protect each other. Okay, I'm going to ask a question. Feel free to pass. My little belief, which is informed by elders, I didn't just come up with this out of my own self, but is that we always had the sheep, and not just always had bighorn sheep, but that we always had a very close relationship with sheep. My theory is that, we're expert weavers and we didn't just learn how to weave overnight, when the Spanish came. And some people say, "Oh, well, you were weaving with cotton before the Spanish came." And I'm like, okay, maybe, sure. But I even think we were weaving with wool fibers before the Spanish came. And so I just wonder if you could speak on that, if you want, about, what was our pre-contact relationship with sheep? Why is that narrative important? And again, feel free to pass because I know it's a very touchy subject.
I go back to what our producer member Ron Garnett says. He says that his great grandmother and their great grandmothers and even their great grandmothers always remember having a relationship with sheep and using their wool and becoming stewards of the land through sheep. So, I feel that Indigenous people in North and South America, especially, they're always trying to, or there's always acts against them to minimize their validity and claims to the land. That, it's like you were nothing before we came in, before colonization came in. And I think it's time that we take that back and we actually reclaim our own story. There's so many people who are like, well, these are Spanish sheep and you would be nothing without the Spanish people. But I'm like, well, if that is 100% true, it was my people and other nations in the Southwest that acclimated them to, quote, the new world and made them very proficient sheep to live on the land.
That's a really good point, because these churro are specifically adapted to our environment. And so it makes it all the more unlikely that they just magically came from Spain perfectly adapted to our lands. Or like you said, if they did, then that we helped them do that, which is also amazing. My understanding is that they're a hybrid, a hybrid of Spanish and indigenous sheep. And that hybridity, one of my elders said, because I'm almost half European, And they said, you're like one of these sheep, Lila. You're like a hybrid. And that's part of why you're so tough. You're like one of these sheep because you got that in botany, when you cross pollinate. And that's why as Dene people, we never marry our own clans. We're always cross pollinating. We're always bringing in new genes. We're intermarrying with other nations. It's always was a good thing to be multicultural, multi-genetic, because it creates a strength in you. Adebe, the original sheep. And yes, maybe there is some Spanish blood in there, but that doesn't make them less our sheep. That's not a bad thing. We don't have like purebred type of mentality. It's good to evolve and mix and become new.
Yeah. It's actually quite cool that you said that though about not intermixing, because I've introduced sheep here on my place from flocks that don't bring in new rams, that practice line breeding, and these flocks are usually non-indigenous flocks, and they don't do that well here on the range. They break down earlier. They're clueless when they have lambs, but when I buy a sheep from who are indigenous, we've noticed that the sheep that are kind of mixed between us have a lot of the vigor that we know this breed to have, which is amazing that we continue to keep the blood or at least gene pool diverse and strong.
That's beautiful and interesting. And I know that there's amazing weavers from Alaska to Patagonia. We were weavers, obviously, why not? And even in the Pacific Northwest, some of the animals they had to make those chilkat weavings, and it's just beautiful, massive civilizations, and they're always trying to reduce us to like hunter gatherer and primitive cave people. Like the further back in time you go, the more stupid people were, and that just doesn't make any sense, because our native way is like we honor our ancestors and we see them as beautiful, really resisting this colonial narrative that we, like you said, we're quote unquote cultureless or nothing until they came in. Anything good we have is just derivative of European culture, which
right
is of course so silly. But it's exciting. A lot of things are changing that now and changing that narrative, including you both.
And I'm actually glad that you brought up the word primitive, because right now there's this movement of non-indigenous people saying this is a primitive breed, which really takes out the brown and indigenous work that has gone into developing the breed. Kind of like they were just out in the Southwest fending themselves from coyotes and wolves. But no, they weren't. They were shepherded by my ancestors, by Pueblo ancestors, and by even Hispanic ancestors that have indigenous roots. There was a lot of hard work that came into this breed, and to call them primitive is just very disrespectful, and it erases the history. So, when people start saying, "Oh, well, this is primitive," and I'm like, "No, it's not." And I'm not the person to ever bring that up around, because scientifically, and Kelly and I are very big into the science of not only sheep, but color patterns and wool. But, scientifically, there is a follicle structure that is referred to as primitive. And in that structure, the primary wool follicles, they'll grow that long outer coat, and the secondary follicles grow a shorter inner coat, and that's the type of coat that Navajo Churro sheep have. So I tell people who try to argue with me, and I'm like, well, scientifically, the only thing primitive about Navajo Churro sheep is the wool structure. But in all reality, this is a heritage breed of sheep, because there's so much heritage behind the sheep, so much history, with many different indigenous nations that, all work to bring them into what they are today.
I just wanted to add that I agree with what you guys are saying. So much of what happens in the discourse is this push to take away the amount of intention that was behind things. And if you get deeply into breeding sheep and understanding the genetics and all the different components that go into producing a fleece that's useful or not, I don't like to use the words good or bad, but you understand how much intention there is behind it. And to look back at the old blankets that, the archival blankets that some of my friends like Nikyle and Zephyr Anderson, who works with us from Rainbow Fiber, and Lila, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to go into archives and look at old Navajo blankets, the obvious intention that went into creating the fibers that go into those blankets to suggest that that was a scruffy, quote unquote, unimproved sheep primitive flock that came from. It's actually rather insane when you see what actually goes into producing a wool clip at that level of luster, strength. It boggles the mind. So the sheep, the history, and not to take away from that with that kind of talk. When we joke sometimes about what the sheep would say when we hear people say things like that, or we see things like that get said, and we think, the sheep would just be rolling their eyes because that's crazy.
Yeah, and Lila, we could go on for hours about this.
Don't even get us started.
So if you want a part two.
Part two. Thank you for sharing more about the detail of, what really goes into producing wool, because I am such a novice, and I'm sure most listeners don't know about how challenging it is to produce certain types of fibers, and the amount, like you said, the amount of intention that goes into it, and the colors, and everything. Probably more than I even understand right now. So thank you for sharing about that. And pardon my ignorance, but a co-op is where every single person who provides wool is an equal owner of the company. And if you sell something, does that sale get redistributed to everyone equally?
Cooperative is designed to organize people who don't necessarily have that bargaining power on their own into a collective who can then fight for better treatment, better prices, and trying to make the world a little bit better place for these producers. So it's less discouraging for them to continue doing the things that they've already been doing. They were out there doing this work, preserving their sheep, holding their stories, being leaders in their communities already, to shine a light on the work that they're doing, and to just get them that little bit of support that does make a difference in how they feel about what they're doing. They were as determined to do it before as could be, but it does make a difference, being able to put something from the sheep back into the hay bill and the expenses that people have related to keeping the sheep. When you see people organizing in a way like this, understand that it's on purpose and, support that kind of work. There are other cooperatives that are working on the Navajo Nation and in other communities. There's an idealism behind that, and there's a spirit to that kind of approach that needs support today more than ever. The idea of the Rainbow Fiber company organizing as a co-op was very intentional by us. And that's because a cooperative not only is legally something else, but it implies something else as well. It's an egalitarian model, a redistributive model. It's a nonprofit model. And, literally in that, no executives exist who will take profit from the company. If we were to profit, that goes out to our members. American business style is individualistic, competition, cutthroat, bloodthirsty. All the funds that we make from the sales of our products at this point just go back into the continuation of our operations. So we sell yarn, it goes right into the fund that we're creating to do our wool buy again. So we've kept our goals simple, but they're quite ambitious in a way. If we can pay for ourselves for the most part, we still do get grants and have, funding partnerships. But if we can take all of the sales dollars and put it right back into the purchasing of the wool for the following year and commit that we're going to show back up for our shepherds, that's our definition of success right now. But in the event that there was a monetary profit, that does go back out to the individual members, allocated based on a % of their contribution to the total amount of wool that was purchased.
What is Rainbow Fiber Co-ops and what is its mission?
Well, I think Kelly just did a great explanation just now. I could just add to it that our mission is to close the gap between rural Diné shepherds and an e-commerce marketplace for their wool. because for so long, you go to Etsy, you go to different, even if you just go to Google and type in Navajo Churro yarn or wool, all of these non-indigenous ranches and farms and fiber people, they all come up, and we just wanted to give, or I guess we wanted to take our space in that and to, amplify the shepherds that we're working with and their wool, because it's also valuable too.
I just saw a woman on Instagram, like on a yoga mat with like a Pendleton design on the yoga mat. And I was like, wow, that's like double appropriation, like all in one. But no, there's so many ways that we can step back into these markets in ways that support families who, it's a little rough out there being a Native person. I think our median household income in Denebakea, I think, is $30,000. That's the household median income for Dene people. So that means there's half of our people are making less than that for the whole household per year. So it's not like capitalism where we're just trying to like, we're just want like some basic decent, income at this point. So what do you feel needs support or needs to be changed in the Dene shepherding world?
In this day and age, a lot of people are just so used to going to the store and buying steaks for like $20 and being able to feed their family, So that type of mentality, when you go to a shepherd, they're expecting a $75 sheep when, it takes more than $75 to raise them. And it's just not being valued as it would to like a commercialized product is. Everybody would want the latest iPhone and they would pay the money to have it. But when they need a sheep for a ceremony, for example, they'll heckle and haggle with you until you lower your price.
The churro meat is extremely lean compared to the average European breed. That the European breed, when you cut the meat, is marbly. There's just fat in and out of every little corner and crevice. Could you speak a little bit about the meat?
The breed is what you would call unimproved. It hasn't been bred to carry a heavier carcass. So, you won't have these loins that are just big and grotesque looking on the hoof. You'll actually have a nicer tasting, leaner meat, because the sheep breed that we raise, they tend to carry their fat inside their abdomens, so it'll form more around their stomachs in caul fat, or it'll form around their kidneys and around their intestines, and they will carry a little bit in their tail. Also, this breed also has less lanolin than other commercial breeds, and lanolin is secreted from the skin, of course, and that also has an effect on meat taste. So when somebody says, "Oh, this tastes so muttony, tastes so gamey," they're referring to that lanolin. And when I feed somebody who says, "Oh, I don't eat lamb, I don't eat mutton," and I feed them, the one that I raised, they're like, "Whoa, what is this?" It tastes so good. So there's obvious differences in how we're raising them, but also how they were bred.
Yeah, I heard some folks say to their family, oh, their family was like, a sheep is a sheep is a sheep. They're all just sheep. And this Dene shepherd was like, no, churro are different. Trust me. He said he was trying to convince his family to try some churro. And they did. And he said, now they're completely sold on it. They're like, okay, I don't want anything but churro from now on. So it's interesting how even our own Dene people are still learning to discern the taste difference because we've had these European sheep for so long. Is there any sights, smells, sounds that you feel when you're with the sheep and that are some of your favorites, because all of our listeners are just listening to our voices. Could you give them an insight into the actual, what it would be like to be with the sheep?
So one of my most favorite, and I think every shepherd can agree, their favorite and even most sacred sounds is during lambing season, when a newborn lamb is being cleaned off by its mother. She just gives the most beautiful, soft mutters to bond with her lamb. And the lamb is, crying back, but not in like an annoying way, in a way that, they, whether it's a ewe or ram, are making a connection to their mom, telling each other like, I'm yours. And she's like, yes, you're mine. That is just an amazing sound to hear. But going back to it, sheep poop. There's nothing like home when you smell sheep poop. And this might be a little controversial, but to some people, they find when a ram or goat, a buck goat, are in rut, they stink. But to me, it smells like home. It reminds me of home. It might be the most pungent smell you'll ever smell, but to me, it just smells like home. It smells like, peace.
Kyle described it perfectly. I would say it's just that feeling like you can take a deep breath. That feeling that you get in your chest and in your heart when you take a good deep breath. And that's how it feels when you're in the corral. You smell that smell. And, when we go visit people, it's just this like instant rapport that you have. All the folks that we visited, you walk into the corral and then we're just all talking sheep, sharing stories. If we share pictures, it's our lambs. We're talking, comparing and contrasting. And, it's like its own world, its own language. And you can sit around a fire and talk about it endlessly. It never gets boring.
I don't know why I'm so fixated on sheep poop, but going back to that, I do have one funny story. It's actually kind of sweet though. I usually go to the post office like at least, I don't know, 5 times a week. And most times I just run out the door with my muck boots on. And it was so sweet. There was this young girl, I would say about 5 or 6. And she comes up to me and she's like, you smell like my grandma. And I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, you smell like a sheep. So she has that connection to her grandma. And I'm like, well, thank you.
And it's really interesting that you bring up the smells and the lungs, because what I heard is that from the elders is that there's a microbiome in us that is influenced when sheep stuff, pheromones, whatever it is, gets into our bloodstream, and that it actually stimulates our being. Just like, when you smell a horse, it smells good, and I think that's evolution trying to tell us like, hey, you're supposed to be with this animal. Or when you even sometimes a dog, some dogs stink, but sometimes they have this special smell that soothes us, almost like sage or sweetgrass, or even our cats. And so what's really fascinating is that the reverse is also true. The sheep, like us, they need us to stimulate their microbiome in their bodies. And so there's a lot of research coming out about the invisible ways that plants, humans, animals actually really do. We actually really are all related in a microbiome way, where we're actually stimulating each other's microbiological processes. So I find it very interesting that you're constantly bringing up like the smell, and the lungs. So with that, obviously we could talk forever, but is there any parting words you'd like to share with the audience? And I'll give each of you a time to do that now.
Well, first, thank you, Lila, for allowing us and giving to be here and giving us a space to talk about what we are doing. And thank you, Kelly, for joining us. I've done a few podcasts, but I've always wanted to do one with you, Kelly. And I'm so glad that it's here with Lila, because I know that you admire her. So thank you both. And to everybody listening, thank you for spending the time out of your day to be with us. And we hope that you look us up online. We're on Instagram. All you got to do is just search Rainbow Fiber Co-op and you'll find us. Yeah.
Thank you both for having me, Mikhail. Thank you for everything. as a friend, as a business partner, mentor, guide, sheep gossip pal. And Lila, thank you so much for I knew this was going to be a really cool, safe place for us to talk and feel like, you would understand where we're coming from about why the sheep are so important. And it's just really nice to be able to have an opportunity to share about rainbow fiber in this way. And like Nicole said, I hope people will look out for us. We're about to be out in the field shearing and packing wool for almost 3 weeks. So if you can find us on Instagram, we try to keep up with posting there pretty regularly. So it's important to us that people understand how we're doing things. We love to show and tell. It just creates such a natural way of communicating. It's interesting. It's not, artifice. It's just, we try to keep it really real, but also share the beauty that we see. So we really appreciate people finding us that way. And if they're able to support us just by seeing us and sharing, or, make a purchase, make a donation, anything really, just the positive vibes it all matters. It all helps. And we appreciate it.
Yes, check out on Instagram, Rainbow Fiber Co-op, all one word. And also Nikile's page is Navajo Shepherd, all one word. I love following your Instagram. I know everyone else does too, because so many cute pictures of sheep and really powerful stories that you write in the captions. Like all that, just you're such a poet, and I appreciate you, being a messenger for this beautiful culture and tradition. So with that, I just thank both of you for being here. And I really encourage every listener, maybe your people are not shepherds. Maybe your people are fishermen, eelmen and women and people. And maybe you work with the elk, the Thule elk. Maybe you work with the oysters, like whatever it is, return to that relationship with your ancestral, not just your ancestral foods, right? But your ancestral relatives, because food and relative is a very blurry line between those things for Indigenous peoples worldwide. So continue to honor your roots, continue to look to your animal relatives, and thank you both for your time. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you so much.